Welcome to the archive, JD the Jungle Dude.
Garrett of the Bard Archives. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing just dandy. So, finally have you on, and we're going to be talking Christmas stories today.
Let's start out with a family Christmas ghost story. How's that?
All right.
Um, Christmas 1949. I had four cousins that were crossing the Ohio River on Christmas Eve, and their boat capsized at around midnight. Same time the boat capsized, my mom, her dad, her aunt, basically the rest of the family that didn't go on the boat heard a knock on each of the four walls. There's my family Christmas ghost story.
All right. Good and spooky.
Now let's talk. Let's lighten it up. Hang on for a second. I got something I'll grab. This, my friend, is probably my prized possession.
All right. And that looks like a giant knife I could skin a bear with.
Yes, it's a Bowie knife, and it's set up on the actual traditional patterns of Jim Bowie's knife. Now, you get a lot of idiots that go, that's not a knife. This is a knife. Yeah, I can't do Australian accents, but I can tell you right now, if Crocodile Dundee wanted to take me on, guaranteed he'd lose. Because the one thing I got to tell you about this Bowie knife, this is the most picturesque memory of Christmases with my father. My late father was my best friend. Now, mind you, I'm just an educated hillbilly. He was an uneducated hillbilly, and he always wanted me to get an education. And it didn't matter if he didn't agree with what I was going after, he was always in my corner. Now, I could have graduated when I was 15, which was, a big thing for me at 15, but they wouldn't let me. And so I had to go the next 2 years of high school just kind of plodding along until I was old enough to, have my mom sign on the dotted line for me to enlist. And I was bored. All I had to do was pass one class each year. And um, being the ornery little jerk that I am and was, let's just say the police officer that lived next door with his sons that were bullies, and I never made peace. We just didn't. And it's like I'm 5'4", 5'6", and these guys, I didn't stop growing until I was 21, and I'm 5'11". Okay, so at 16 years old, I'm like 5'4", 5'6".
A little bit of a troublemaker, too.
Oh yeah, it was. Don't dare me. Um, I literally, my dad built a he built a concrete barn. It's a 3-car garage with a loft. Well, the summer before I turned 16, I overinflated a hoppity hop and I put on a mini bike helmet. And we got all of the kids around, and they all bet my brother $5 I wouldn't hop out. I hopped out. I hit the ground and remembered Newton's second law of gravity. that which comes down goes up twice as fast. So when I hit the ground, I let go of the hoppy hop so I didn't go back up next to high power line. Now, mind you, yeah, that kept me from, hospital, dying, whatever. Uh, my mother didn't find out about it until about 20 years later because it would have got me killed. But uh, so, yeah, my dad found out about it and he knew and he didn't tell mom and he just said, don't ever be that stupid again, you know? And, then there was the fact that, after it was done, the way my father found out was I whooped up on my brother for running off with all of the money from the bets.
That's great.
Okay, so you fast forward 6 months later. I'm 16 years old. I'm bored. I'm dealing with idiots in school. We've got family drama coming from my oldest brother and my sister. And I'm not going to go into it because it's very personal. It's very, let's just say, Eskimo, very vulgar. Okay.
Are you guys
It,
Inuit?
huh?
Are you guys Inuit?
No, we're Cherokee, but
Okay.
it's actually from a book I read when I was in fifth grade called Cheaper by the Dozen.
Oh.
The mother of the family, anytime something was vulgar or obscene, she would call it Eskimo. It's a little too Eskimo to talk about in private. And my father and I use this code word because if I ever cursed in front of my parents, um, if I saw the light of day, I was grounded till I was 30. See what I'm saying?
Right.
It was the 70s. I didn't have a timeout. I got a knockout. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
My timeout was when one of the parents dropped the belt or the switch. Um, but, like I said, I'm an educated hillbilly being raised by an uneducated hillbilly. And my father never had a good relationship with his dad. And we lost my grandpa in 74. And it's a very personal story that I'm not going to go into because we're talking about Christmas stories and I've already given you a spooky one. So, um, after dealing with all of the nonsense of not being able to graduate and having to fight idiots at school and having to deal with, the neighbors and the police officer. My dad was an ex police officer. And so anytime the neighbor would start crowing, my dad would tell him, you don't know half of the laws you're quoting. Shut up and sit down, or I'll come over because I got bail money. My dad was 6'2" and weighed 220. My whole interest in the martial arts came from my father.
Yeah.
I used to
He was
watch
also a
him kick.
veteran too, right?
Yeah, he was a veteran from the Korean War, and he was um, he helped with physical remains recovery and sending home property of missing in action troops, killed in action troops to their families. And I never heard how horrible that was until after he had dementia about 3 years before he passed.
Yeah.
And
So really, really light experience over in Korea he had.
well, yeah, it's like this. My dad taught me at a young age, if you're going to live, don't let grass grow under your feet. Do it right. Go out and do it while you're young. right. But that being said, my dad wasn't a jerk. He wasn't a jackass. He was a very kind and loving man. He worked two full time jobs and a part time job to get money to build the additions to to the house that I own, my house now. Um, and then on the weekends, he came home and built it. And he built the entire loft of the garage. And this is stuff that nowadays it's extremely rare. It wasn't common back then, but it was a little more common than it is now. So anyhow, I'm going through all of this nonsense. There was a jackass in school that he was a year or two older than me, and he was like on the football team, and he was constantly running his mouth. And I kid you not, I told him for 6 months, you can run your mouth all you want. You lay hands on me, you're mine. Now, this is coming from a guy that's like 5'4", 5'6". But what he didn't know was I had my dad's British Commando dagger and his M1 bayonet in my jacket pocket. And so he literally, after I told him to just leave me the hell alone, he decides he's going to push me into my own locker. I came out. I put both blades to either side of his throat in a scissor motion, and I walked him to the other side of the hall. I said, you ever lay hands on me, you won't go home to mommy and daddy. Now, he went down and he told the principal. And this was like just after Thanksgiving, not 3 weeks before Christmas. This shit happened. And so the principal comes up. Meanwhile, you got JD the Jungle Dude. You got his friends Chad and Bobby, and we're all mixed bloods. And these guys had my back, and so they hid my knives, my cigarettes, my booze, whatever was in the locker. They just hid them. So, you know, this was this was me being a 16-year-old idiot, but a 16-year old idiot that wasn't going to get pushed around. And so nobody found anything in my locker. Nobody in the hall was going to narc on me. And everything was just hushed up and kicked onto the rug. I get home. This guy's dad calls my dad, complaining about your son pulled a knife on my son. And I'm in the background, and my dad goes, JD, did you pull a knife on his son? I said, no, I pulled two. And he goes, why would you pull knives on another person? I said, well, he's bigger than me. And I told him if he ever laid hands on me, he wasn't going home to mommy and daddy. And he goes, hold it. What? I said, for 6 months, ever since school started. And before that, this guy's been pushing my buttons, and, you know, he can run his mouth. That's fine. That's just running your mouth. You lay hands on me, you're mine. He laid hands on me, and that was it. My dad got on the phone, goes, all right, this is how we're going to do it. Your son's been bullying my son. My son took his own part. Why don't we do this? Bring your son down. We'll put both of them in boxing gloves in the backyard, and they can go at it. The other father goes, my son doesn't know how to box. My dad goes, my son was taught to box when he was 4 to keep him from wrecking the house with his brother. If you don't want him to box, tell your son to leave his hands off my son, or my son will take him to the bank. He'll just go ahead and deposit him wherever. That's a very that's a very redneck way to go. And it's like your son's a head taller and 100 pounds heavier than my son. So of course he has a discussion with mom. They get a contact from the principal, and it was one of those, your son can't be doing this. And my dad just looked at him and he said, my son will do whatever it takes to protect himself. And the the principal looked at me and he goes, what do you plan to do with this? I just look up at him and go, um, as soon as I'm 17, I'm enlisting. What else do you need to know? So anyway, we fast forward to Christmas. I've had all of this nonsense, and um, it's a nice Christmas. We have a good dinner. It's kind of very low key. My dad goes, JD, come upstairs. You haven't got my Christmas present yet. So I come upstairs and he pulls out this. You've been wanting this since you were 12 years old. But I told you you couldn't have it till you're 16. Well, now you're 16, so you've got it. What are you going to do with it? I said, well, Dad, I'm going to take care of it. And it wasn't like, Ralphie on a Christmas story. You'll shoot your eye out, kid. Mom didn't like it, but at the same time, she didn't have any room to say anything because she'd been carrying a hunting knife since she was 12 with a BB gun everywhere she went till she was an adult. So she didn't have anything to say. But they grew up in the hills. And so I've got my playground was a 300-acre woods. And so, yeah, I mean, but I'm not going to go into a bunch of stuff. Let's fast forward 7 years to 1989. Worst year of my life. I come home from having a very bad entanglement with the U.S. Army where they broke my contract, and I had idiots that wanted to ruin my life. We get to the Christmas season because got home. I got home from Fairbanks, Alaska, December 1st. And so we jump in 3 weeks ahead. And my dad is looking for me. And I was having a bad moment. And at the time, we didn't know what PTSD was. And shell shock was only for people who had seen combat. My dad came in my room on December 21st, and I was laying in a pair of gym shorts in my bed with my arms crossed over my Bowie knife, asleep. Next morning, my dad goes, know what you're going through. I've been there. Just remember that Bowie knife is just a representative of how I feel. He goes, it's just a symbol, but it's a symbol that you always wanted to embrace. And if you can't hug me, hug it. That was it.
Thanks for sharing.
Any questions before I start bawling?
before they're bawling. Yeah, so I mean, seems like your dad was quite the guy.
Oh, he was my best friend. I told everybody when he was alive, I said, if I ever get married, he's going to be my best man. Forget about, a bachelor party. Dad and I'll just go shooting targets. You guys are welcome to come along.
All right. So why did you pick the
And
Bowie knife of all things?
um, I'm going to be exactly honest with you. I learned
Rambo?
to re- I learned to read at the age of 3 from Tarzan comic books and Prince Valiant and the Phantom Sunday Funnies.
That's great.
And the reason I learned to read at 3 was because every time I asked my brother, my sister, my mom, or my dad to read to me, and I always had something to read with me. Okay. To this day, if nothing else, you will find a Bible in my belly bag when I travel. Okay. And so they said, "You do realize if you learn to read, we won't have to read it for you." And I just looked at them and went, "Okay, teach me to read."
All right, so JD was a little sassafras back then.
Oh no, it's like this. I was ornery than cat crap smelled, but I was an all or nothing guy. That hasn't changed. Why settle for half a loaf when it's not going to satisfy you? If you can't get what you want, be satisfied with what you got and go on. But anyway, so yeah, and it was like Tarzan always had a knife. And dad started telling me about Jim Bowie, and mom told me about Jim Bowie. And so Bowie knives, that's not a knife. That's a stinking short sword. Okay. It's 15 inches long and 5 pounds of metal. Okay. I could slap you with the flat of it and knock you cold. It's just a fighting knife. And so um, that's what I wanted. When I was 12, for my 12th birthday, my dad bought me a K-Bar USMC fighting knife at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, because that's where my sister and her husband at the time were. And my dad's an ex-Marine, so he got me a K-Bar. So I'd been running around with, a little pin knife about that big since I was 6. And when I was 9, I came home, went down in the basement. My father had had a bad day and he was throwing knives against a board. And I'm like, "Dad, why are you throwing knives against a board?" He goes, "Well, better against the board than against the boss. I really want." It's like,
Better get
okay,
support from the
yes,
boss.
anything that keeps you out of jail, we're fine. And so, but yeah, I mean, my dad was like I said, he was 6'2" at 220. Um, I watched my dad break two by fours with just his hand.
That's what kind of guy he was.
Yeah, I watched him take a 16 penny nail, wrap his hand in cloth, and he drove it through 3 2x4s and clenched it on steel at the bottom. And then he picked the 2x4s up. Yeah, there's there's no great mystery about where I got my interest in martial arts and being able to handle myself. It's none.
Yeah. So your dad
So
was a real life action hero.
you know what? It's I'll go ahead and say yeah. What am I supposed to do? Say no? For crying out loud, he was a truck driver. I mean, it was he was my rock. He was my foundation. He was my best man. He was my example. He was my hero. There are action heroes that could never measure up to that.
Yeah.
So when I went to enlist, he said, join the army. And I'm like, but you were a Marine. He's like, yeah, well, we don't have any military tradition in this family. Join the army. It's a shorter enlistment and you can learn a trade. I went into supply, and I guarantee you, I've had over 12 years working in logistics throughout my life.
Nice. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Only being in there can give you some skill.
Okay. Anything else?
Got a message for future generations or Christmas wishes?
Peace on earth, goodwill towards men and all others. Wishing you all peace and peace of mind.